Welcome to the Humble Hoof Podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. I think a lot of hoof care providers listening can think about cases that were particularly memorable throughout their time practicing hoof care. There are ones that were maybe really difficult or ones that turned out better than we expected. And we were able to see an amazing outcome on a really hard case. I reached out to Cristina Brogdon and Jody Jensen, both of whom have seen their fair share of rehab cases, and we discussed some of our favorite cases as well as some of our most difficult ones. So yeah, thank you both so much for being willing to do this. This is really helpful just to be able to have people that are willing to hop on and chat with me about various topics. So I know that both of you are both very busy, so we'll try to get through these questions and not mess up your afternoons and evenings. But why don't we start with some introductions? So, Cristina, your name is first on my screen. So if you want to start and just say what area you work in and kind of what the focus is of your hoof care practice.
Okay, so I work in Keller, Texas. Well, that's where I'm out of. It's north of Fort Worth, and I kind of cover this area, like the DFW Metroplex. And then I go into East Texas a little bit too. And I went through Ida's Hammers program in 2016, and then I'm working through PHCP right now. So I should have that done this year.
That's great. And so do you have a certain focus in your practice? Are you doing a lot of composite work or mostly barefoot or anything like that?
I do mostly barefoot. I do a handful of composites, but if it's for people that are far away, that's kind of hard to get back out there when they're, 3 hours away from me. Right. So I don't do a whole lot of that.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. All right. And Jody?
I'm Jody Jensen, and I am servicing southwestern Washington, some western Washington up towards Kitsap County. And I do a lot of barefoot, and I'm getting a fair number of corrective composite type cases. And that's actually, I'm not taking any new, just standard barefoot clients anymore. I'm just doing new cases are only the tough ones that often are working with a vet.
Yeah, I know. And it's so hard to say no to those cases when you're like, oh, I just feel like this is such a horse that needs help. And yeah. So sometimes even when you're booked, it's like, you can't say no.
No.
All right. So obviously both of you know, the focus of our conversation today is sort of interesting cases to work on and maybe some examples of ones that we've worked through in our career so far. And just because honestly, I like hearing about these cases, it's always really good to hear what other people have done and been successful with. And I think it's just really, it's fun to kind of talk about some crazy hoof stuff we've come across. So I guess kind of to set the scene, I would love to hear from you both what your favorite kind of cases to work on are in general. Is it laminitis? Is it navicular? Is it a crazy other option? What kind of cases do you like working on? And feel free, whoever wants to go, you can just start.
Okay. I like the ones where it's been, more lack of farrier disease because, they're going to come out hypothetically good at the end of it, hypothetically.
Right.
And the owners that have taken them over tend to be better about following directions than the farmer owners that they rescued them from.
Yeah.
I actually started into hoof care because of my horse that foundered 2 weeks after I bought him. And that sent me down the journey of metabolic disorders and hoof care. And so they're my favorite. And I love turning those horses around. And I have pretty strong requirements about owners complying with diet and exercise and diagnosis parts of the program.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of going to make or break the cases, for the success rate in those cases for sure. And I know I'm not the one being interviewed, but, I think both of you might know this, but I really enjoy working on navicular cases. And the funny part about that is I find them to be some of the most difficult sometimes because there's so much that can fall under a navicular diagnosis and, kind of parsing out what actually is causing the pain can be tricky. But like you, Jody, coming to hoof care with a laminitis case, like I came to hoof care with a navicular case, and just seeing those horses become sounder is such a joy to me. So that's kind of, my favorite. I get a little excited when someone contacts me and they're like, I have a navicular diagnosed horse. And I'm like, oh, yay.
Yeah, I agree. I've gotten into more navicular now too, actually, having having gone to that with another of our personal horses, that's become another interesting thing. I just like the tough cases. I like to troubleshoot and figure out, what makes them move better and how I can help improve the horse's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I came into hoof care with a canker case, but I don't want to see more of those. So mine's funny.
Yeah, I've only worked on one canker case, and it was the smelliest and bloodiest thing I have ever worked on.
I'm thankful I haven't seen one.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I still work on the horse, and he's doing great, but it's one of those things where every week or every cycle I show up and I'm like, please just don't have another spot of canker. Like, please just stay in remission.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine has been in remission off and on, but she has flare-ups too. And it's like, okay, time to deal with this all over again.
I know. So. Right. Yeah, I know. It's one of those things where I've only had this one case, and the vet has been great. The vet has come out and done debridements and helped me with cleaning it up and keeping it in line. But it's something that I feel like doesn't ever 100%. You can never 100% feel confident that it's never going to come back, at least in the case that I work on. So.
That's the same with mine.
Awesome. Well, I figure we almost kind of jumped a little bit into the next question, but I would love to dive right in and talk about some interesting cases that we've worked on. And I'm sure that we've all kind of seen different things. We're all in different parts of the country. But yeah, I mean, if Cristina, you want to start, and if you want to talk about a case and a little bit about what the diagnosis was, the treatment, and how it turned out, that'd be great.
Okay. So the one I'm going to talk about is a Shivers horse, actually. And I went into it, not knowing a whole lot and thinking, oh, yeah, I'll be able to pick up his back foot, not realizing exactly how hard that is. He had actually moved down here from Washington, and one of my other clients had gotten me this client that was at her barn. And so we went out there and I tried to lift up that foot and couldn't get it. She's like, oh, the other farrier, he just, kind of scoops it. So she moved him forward and we tried to scoop it and it didn't work, obviously. And then we got him forward on like a board and got a kind of trim done. And I called Paige after that. I was like, okay, I've got this horse. And she had seen a lot of Shivers horses in Virginia, so she helped me with that. So we finally gotten him to where he would go forward on a stand and I could trim him from the top. And then this last time we did some stretches that Deb Davies had showed me with this OS, and we were able to get him to set his foot down after the trim instead of flinging it and moving quickly out of the way. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So what kind of stretches? I mean, it's probably hard without a visual to kind of explain it, but what kind of stretches do you do? Because I have some Stringhalt and Shivers cases that are so difficult with their hind end.
So what she does is she has two people stand on either side of their hips and push backwards on their ilium towards their rear end. And you try and hold that for 3 minutes if you can.
Wow.
And that stretches their psoas out. So we did that, and she's going to work on that more over the next 4 weeks and see if we can't get him even better than that.
And is that horse retired?
He is for the moment. I don't know if she plans on riding him anymore. She's getting married and stuff too. So, it'll be a while if he goes back to work at all. But he's moving comfortably and everything.
That's good.
Yeah.
Is it mostly affecting lifting the hinds and not necessarily in movement?
Yeah, his is mainly just lifting his hind legs. He looks like he walks sound, puts all 4 feet down normal and everything else. So his is just the lifting and then the going backwards.
Yeah.
With his and then the flinging.
Right. Yeah, I have one that you pick up one hind and it's almost like he will just fall over, standing on the other hind. And it's just a very neurological reaction with him almost. And it's hard because I don't know if you heard the conversation with Dr. Audrey DeClue about Stringhalt and Shivers horses. And, she sees a lot of them as injuries. And the 1 or 2 cases that I work on now are very like neurological presenting, but it's hard because we don't have, the same kind of kind of practitioners or the people that have worked extensively on the bodywork side of things and done that sort of rehab with the soft tissue to really test to see if it's actually neurological.
Right.
But yeah, it's so cool to hear about people that are successful with that because it's such a difficult thing because there's so many questions still revolving around that kind of diagnosis.
Yeah, and she had talked about working with someone from her work. She's a X-ray tech or something with X-rays. So she'd had somebody there that was kind of interested in doing what Dr. DeClue had talked about, the procedure that she does, but we didn't go any further than that.
Yeah.
Other than discussing it for him.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that he's doing well, so that's good.
Yes, it is.
All right.
Makes things much less stressful.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And safer for you, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah, because to grab the stand and move real fast is not fun.
Right. I know. Sometimes I'm trimming a horse and I feel like when I'm holding up a hind leg, I'm on borrowed time. Like you're just trying to get as much done as possible before that leg gets slammed down. And it can be dangerous. Yeah. So figuring out ways to get them really comfortable and able to actually get a good trim and not just I have to get this done trim. I mean, there's a difference between the two of those. So that's
yes. Yeah.
All right, Jody.
Oh gosh, I've had a couple of really fascinating cases. The most recent one that I've done, actually it's over time, but I have 2 little mini donkeys that I went into to see, and really, really bad white line disease, laminitis. And this was before I got as strict as I am now about taking new clients with owners that cooperate. So no major changes were made. They were out on a pretty big pasture, like a 1/2 acre, 3/4 acre pasture for the little donkeys. And I ended up resecting all of their feet about halfway up the hoof. And he did treat some, but over time we got them to grow out. But every fall and every spring we'd backslide. And I kept saying, you need to change the diet. You need to get them off of the grass and test the hay. And it took me about 2 years to finally convince him to change the diet. And he blocked off part of the pasture and tilled up a section for them, and they were on no grass. And these little guys, they were pretty good, but their front feet, they would always like try and run away and do a little bit of a rear. And the first trim after he tilled up that field and they were off grass for 3.5, 4 weeks, they were both stood perfectly.
Wow.
Nice.
He was finally a believer that, the diet does play a big role too. And, 6 months later, they had no white line disease, no laminitis. Little guys are running around happy as a clam now.
Nice.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So that's kind of fun. I mean, we can do so much, but we're not magicians. And unless the owners are on board with making other changes too, we're kind of stuck at a certain spot.
Right. And like you said, where once the owners see how much diet, especially with laminitis cases, how much diet affects their feet and their comfort, until they see that, it's hard to really convey how important it is. I mean, we can shout it from the rooftops, but it's easy for them to be like, well, it's just like a little handful of grain, or like, oh, but it's just like a tiny bit of grass in the paddock. And
right.
And this wasn't even the case I was going to talk about, but I have one foundered mini that I showed up to. I've just 2 months ago was the first time I met her. And I got there and I told the owner before I went out, because she contacted me and said she had this foundered mini in a lot of pain. And, she was wondering if I could help. And the first thing I said before I went out there was, you have to know that I'm going to recommend diet and blood work and, to get a proper diagnosis. And you have to know that I'm doing this because, or I'm suggesting these things because I think it's really important, and I don't want to come out there and be unsuccessful because we're just missing something with the diet or management. And so she was all good with that. And so I literally went through like a fine tooth comb in her grain room, and I was like, you need to stop, because she was feeding literally a 1/4 cup of Balancer to this mini morning and night. And it was a balancer. And I was like, I know that this balancer seems fine. I mean, it was one that actually didn't even have super high sugar and starch. Like, it would look okay on the label. But I was like, when a horse is in an active laminitic attack, sometimes these things can be a trigger, even though they would otherwise be safe. So I'm just asking you to remove it. I know it sounds wacky because it seems like it should be okay, but please just remove it. And she had like little bits of weeds, not even grass. She was in a quote unquote dry lot, but she had tiny bits of weeds around the edge of her fencing. And I was like, can you just muzzle her when she goes out? I know that sounds crazy because she doesn't really have anything in there, but just muzzle her. And I went back 2 weeks later because, you know, founder minis can grow like wild. And so I went back 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, she was sound. And
nice.
the owner was like, I would have never believed that these things could have caused issue. And I was like, yeah, I know. It's crazy how much it's not the trim. I mean, it's off. I mean, obviously the trim plays a role, but it's not like there's a magic trim that will immediately get rid of this lamina that's inflamed and breaking down. It's something that's coming from the inside. Like the management has to be there. And it's just that it's definitely a rewarding thing to see when, you know, those little changes the owner can do results in this like amazing change for the horse. Yeah. And honestly, that wasn't even the case I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about a navicular case.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I had one of my favorite laminitis cases. I mean, everybody had given up on the horse except for the owner. And he had been foundered and mostly down for a couple of months and abscessing, and the vet and the barn owner and everybody was like, you need to euthanize. And she and I had talked several times, and she'd implemented all the diet changes, but I wasn't close enough to do the trimming for her. And she called me up one day. She said, well, I decided to euthanize, and we dug a hole, and the vet came and he yanked the lead rope away and took off up the hill. Will you take him at your place and rehab him?
Nice.
And I did. And that was 5 years ago. And he just passed away from unrelated causes last month. So
I know there are definitely times when I'm like, I wish I could just take this horse and like, you know, do everything that needs to be done. Because sometimes it can feel like a lot for owners sometimes, you know.
Right. And that's why I love having him here, because, you know, I can keep him for 6 months and completely control the diet. They get the blood work done. I can know if we need to medicate. I'm well versed at medicating these horses, and, you know, I can get the trim right. I can trim weekly when they're here, you know, and keep little bits of trimming done. And then I can, you know, send them home with a plan. And that gives the owners chances too, to get their place set up and ready to manage a metabolic horse.
Right. Yeah. And for those listening who aren't sure about laminitic cases or what that kind of management means, you know, ECIR is a really fantastic resource. And a lot of it is just keeping the starch in the diet less than 4%, keeping sugar and starch in the diet less than 10% combined. And then just, I mean, if they're in active laminitis, like absolutely no grass, no grain, and just, you know, soaking hay if you don't have a hay analysis done. I mean, that can mean the difference between life and death for some of these cases.
It can. And hay analysis is so important. I mean, the nitrates and high protein in the hays I'm finding out here are crazy sometimes, and they're just not safe either.
Wow. So that must be, so in my area, a lot of the protein is low. Like it's common to see a hay test come back at like 6 or 7%, but you see high protein in your area?
Yeah, especially in Eastern Washington, because it's irrigated.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had a batch of teff tested that was 17% protein, and the nitrates were sky high. You couldn't even feed this hay as 100% of a horse diet safely.
Oh, my goodness. Do you see that in Texas, Cristina?
Not so much with that. We've got a lot of coastal, so that's fairly easy for people to soak in everything. So it's more the starch that they have to watch for than the protein with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. We have to worry about the sugar. And honestly, the last few years, it's very rare that I even see a hay test that's higher than 4% starch. I don't think I've seen one in a while, but we see iron that is off the charts. I mean, I've seen hay tests with iron that's at like 500 ppm.
I have too.
Yeah, we're pretty high too.
Yep.
I know it's funny because some of my clients will be like, well, this hay came, because I'm in Massachusetts and we have some local hay, but we don't have tons of fields, like places in New York. So a lot of people are like, well, I get my hay from New York, so maybe that's better. And I'm like, honestly, it's everywhere. Everywhere has usually high iron,
And you just don't know until you test. I mean, the last 4 hay tests I've done have been super low iron. I've been super excited about balancing them.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost enough copper and zinc in a regular California trace.
Oh,
nice.
I know. That's hardly ever heard of. It was great.
That's awesome. I know. I always tell people to just skip right to the California Trace Plus because usually it's the iron's just too high, but that's great. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like I have to talk about a navicular case because they're my favorite. But the funny thing is this navicular case had kind of I don't want to spoil it before I even tell the story, but it had a little bit of a unexpected resolution. So I came to this mare that was recommended to me by a vet who knows that I have my own navicular case that was sort of my passion to work with. And she was shod and very uncomfortable. She couldn't turn tightly. She was just shuffling around, stabbing her toes into the ground. They had tried every single corrective shoeing package on this mare, like wedges, and they found that she hated anything except very thin web, peripherally loading, like just metal shoes. Like she didn't like any kind of pads or frog support or anything like that. She would instantly walk like she was walking on eggshells. And so I went out there and she, her x-rays, she was NPA in the front, negative palmar angle. Her hinds actually weren't as bad as her fronts. And she had enough room in the toe that I could kind of adjust some things with the trim. So I pulled her shoes. And usually when I pull shoes, I don't like to make a ton of crazy adjustments because they're already adjusting to not having shoes on. But she just had, sometimes you go to those cases where you're like, oh my goodness, I just need to take some of this toe because it's just wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I adjusted her ankles a bit and put her in cloud boots. And, within the first cycle, really just in the cloud boots, she was so much more comfortable. And I pulled her shoes in, October 2020. So winter comes around. She is great all winter long. The owner actually starts riding again. There's an indoor that she's riding in. The mare is doing awesome. Everyone's like, holy moly, like what the heck happened with this mare? She's doing so great. She's more comfortable barefoot than she'd ever been in any kind of shoeing package. And then spring rolls around. I actually was sick with COVID and didn't work for a few months. And so I missed out on a few cycles of this mare's trimming. And when I came back, she was so lame. And it wasn't her trim. She was getting a good trim. And the only change was that there was some grass. She was being turned out on grass, and all winter there was snow and ice and everything was frozen. She wasn't eating any grass outside. And come spring, she was dead lame again, as bad as she had been in the fall. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm convinced it's the grass. But the owner was like, no, I had an MRI done. She has DDFT tears. She has a navicular cyst. It's definitely navicular. It's not the grass. And I was like, I know, but please just humor me. Like, I promise you that there's too much of a coincidence here that she does great all winter with you riding regularly and her DDFT is not bothered. And then suddenly, in the spring, she's lame. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me when the ground is like softer and there's, so yeah. She ends up going south for a bit. Her and her owner were traveling around and she's not doing great. She comes back and again, I'm like, I swear to you, like these feet look like they're laminitic to me. There wasn't a lamellar wedge. There wasn't any like evidence of rotation, but there was chronic event lines. She looked like she had super thin soles. She had no collateral groove depth. She just looked like she had these feet that were just so weak. And I was like, listen, just muzzle her. Try to muzzle her. Let's see what happens. Let's like put a muzzle on. She's not needing weight. Like she has plenty of weight on her. Her owner puts a muzzle on, and which you wouldn't think is enough for horses that are really sore. Within a few weeks, she is 10 times more comfortable. She's back to turning fine. She's not, shifting her weight on each foot. She's significantly more comfortable. And that was just a few months ago. Now she's the soundest I've ever seen her since the owner has stopped her access to grass. And I'm just, it's crazy how, yes, she has this diagnosis where she absolutely has DDFT injuries, and they're pretty significant and chronic. They look like there's chronic injury there. And she has confirmed damage on an MRI, like severe cysts on her navicular bone. But she is like, her trigger for inflammation or whatever seems to be sugars in grass. And maybe that's just like what knocks the inflammation over the edge and sort of gets everything stirred up again. But when she's not on grain and grass, you wouldn't know that she had all that crazy pathology. And so that's why I like quote unquote navicular cases, because sometimes a simple change can take this case that people would just write off and retire, or do like a neurectomy, or have them in corrective shooting for the rest of their lives. Sometimes a simple change can take that case and turn it into a maintenance, like easy trim. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
What breed?
She's a quarter horse, little quarter horse.
I have almost the exact same case going on.
Really? And does she respond to grass the same way?
Yes. Yeah. And because I started with the horse summer of 2021 and got progressively better over the winter. And all of a sudden, come February, late February, when our grasses really start to shoot up here, he was dead lame. And blood work came back normal for insulin resistance and Cushing's. But I said, pull him off the grass anyway. And same thing, within a month, he was sound again.
Yeah.
And so they've kept him dry lotted now. And a matter of fact, I had him in, because he started as a navicular case and he had negative angles. We put him in composite shoes, and I just pulled his shoes off totally last month, and he's going barefoot now.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, and that again, like, obviously you did you had him in a composite setup and you did work that to his feet that was likely super helpful. But that shows, like, again, management is playing a huge role. Like, it's, what is the horse eating? What is the horse getting when we're not there?
Yeah, I've had one tell me that her horse was sore, that she trimmed herself. So I was going to come look at him. So she had left him up all day. And then she walks him out of his stall and he's not sore at all. I'm like, okay, what was different? It's like, he was up. He wasn't on the grass. It's like, so leave him up.
Right. Yeah.
So now we muzzle, and yeah.
It's so hard for owners because, they see these big, movies of horses on these big Kentucky green grasses with white picket fences. And they think, well, my horse has to have grass. But Western Washington grasses are ridiculously high in sugar.
Yeah.
It was funny because this owner is super into diet, and she posts all the time about diet stuff, and she didn't catch that. And I was like, hey, big picture here.
And it is hard. Like Jody, what you're saying is, it's so true. Even non-horse owners, like non-horse people at all, when I talk to them about, because they ask about, what do you do? I left teaching to do this. And so they ask a million questions about it. And one big thing is when I mentioned how important diet is and how a lot of horses can't have grass, but they're like, but horses are made to be on grass. And I'm like, well, not really. Maybe like the shrub grass that's out in the like wild, like the wilderness, but like not the cow pasture we have in so many places.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
and then I love the people that you go out and they say, well, there's no grass out there, but yet, outside the fence, it's 6 inches tall and lush and green. And it's like, well, you have to mow this stuff, right? Well, yeah. Well, who do you think's mowing in the field?
Yes. Yeah. That becomes my go-to phrase is when they're like, well, there's no grass out there. I always respond with, if the horse wasn't in there, would there be grass? Like, okay, then who's eating? Like, what's happening to it? They're eating it. Like, right. That's why there's quote unquote no grass there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we could talk forever about a million cases, which is one of my favorite things to do, is to get together with hoof care providers and talk about cases. But I would love to also talk a little bit about, what you find to be the most difficult cases to work on. So I don't know if either of you want to start with that one. I know it's a kind of a tough question.
The most difficult in terms of horse or owner compliance?
Oh gosh. I mean, either. Yeah, if you have one of each.
Yeah. So in terms of owner compliance, I had one that had thrush, every single time I came there. It's like, okay, I've left you minerals. I bought them for you. Please gift them to him. And, here's some toe jam to put on his feet. And they wouldn't do it. She's like, oh, that's just how his feet look. That's how they've always looked. I'm like, just do it. Do what I've told you. And so she ended up having him go to her nephew. So I don't know what his feet look like now, but that was every single time. So he'd get treated every 6 weeks, and that was it.
Oh, gosh.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I've actually, not to jump in there, but I've actually had a case where I gave the owner at my cost some thrush treatment. And I was just like, you can have this for free if you will treat their feet every, at least a few times a week. And the next time I came back out, she had not even picked up their feet. I could tell. And I was like, oh my goodness, I wasted giving that. I could have given that to somebody else who'd actually use it,
I've done the same thing. And those are the tough cases, I think, too, is when the owners just, they nod their head and agree and then do nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they tell you, oh, we haven't opened that yet. 6 weeks later.
Right.
It's like, okay, you're supposed to open it and use it. It's easy.
Right. And it's like, we're there every, 4 to 6 weeks, whatever the cycle length is. And we can only do so much.
Yeah. We're not magic. We're not making trips up there twice a week to take care of it for you. Right.
Unless you want to come bring the horse here and do a rehab board, then I can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I will say this has nothing to do with owner compliance necessarily, but probably one of the hardest cases I've worked on is a SIRS laminitis case. The systemic inflammatory response syndrome. I mean, it's just so different than a regular laminitis case where it's like the feet are just melting,
Yes.
And I had another foundered mini. They seem to come to me for some reason. And the owner was doing everything right on the metabolic side, and we couldn't figure out why he was still in so much pain. And we discovered that he had a chronic liver infection. And that was triggering he was triggering colitis, actually. And then he was getting this SIRS laminitis. And it was just, until that liver infection was treated, his chronic founder wouldn't stop. And it was so difficult because we didn't know to keep looking for, we didn't know what to look for. It's there's so many things that can cause that, like a fever, an illness, a toxic weed, a retained placenta. Like there's so many things, and it can get bad really fast that it's scary as the hoof care provider to feel like I'm only able to do so much in this case. Now the vet needs to figure out what to test for, and you're like racing the clock, I find those cases to be stressful to me.
I had one of those last year I worked on briefly. She kept trimmer hopping because she wanted, a magic thing in vet hopping, and they ended up thinking it was liver related with her, and they ended up putting her down. I don't know what the actual diagnosis ended up being. I just saw that they had finally euthanized her, but she'd been at a bunch of different vet clinics here spending, thousands and thousands of dollars trying to figure out what was wrong with her.
Gosh, it's so hard.
So,
and it's like heart-wrenching,
Yeah, because you want to help, but you can't,
Toughest one I had was a black walnut poisoning, and we lost that one too.
Yeah. And that's why, I love when people are so adamant about diet for laminitis and management. But then when some people, like some owners who have never seen a SIRS case, when they go so far as to like, make others feel bad about like, well, laminitis is 100% preventable and treatable. And if the horse, it's all up to the owner. Like sometimes there are those cases where it's, you can be doing everything. And like Cristina, you were saying, like pouring money into these cases. And sometimes it's just like the kindest thing to do is let them go if the toxins that are causing the issue can't get under control.
Yeah.
Well, I think Cristina, you were saying that you had to get going in a few minutes. So if you want, we can kind of round this out with, I know it's kind of been a conversation about difficult cases and favorite cases, but maybe if we can end with some advice for owners or hoof care providers that are dealing with a tough case. I don't know if you guys have any words of wisdom.
Yeah. For owners, just do what your trimmer says. If they tell you to fix the diet, fix the diet. If they give you stretching homework, do your stretching homework. If they tell you get out of chiropractor, get out of chiropractor. And for trimmers, don't take on the ones that are awful to deal with, like that are trying to hurt you, but stick with it if it's a case where the owner's being compliant and it's an issue that you can work on and fix. And then, go to other people for advice if you need to on difficult cases.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Reach out. There's so many good resources, for metabolic disorders. There's the equine Cushing's and insulin resistant group. And there's so many different trimmer groups that you can consult with on tough cases. I mean, I just went into a whole barn of foundered Tennessee walkers, and they'd had a trimmer in, but I don't think the trimmer knew what to do with a really bad case and barely touched the feet when they needed like inches taken off.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, even without radiographs, you could see there were inches, and then I had radiographs too, so I could really work with them. But reach out if you don't know, or if you're newer. There's lots of people willing to help and consult.
Yeah, and honestly, it's hard because there can be a lot of ego in the hoof care world of like, oh, well, I can't show that I don't know what to do. But every single farrier, every single hoof care provider has cases that they're not sure about. I mean, there's nobody knows everything. And so if you're going to say, I need help, it's only going to benefit the horse, So yeah, just being willing to have somebody else in and willing to look for more answers for the horse if something's not working out.
Yeah, sometimes you just can't see what's wrong, and another set of eyes is the best thing you can get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you both being willing to hop on this call. I know it was kind of last minute, and I was taking up a good portion of your day, so this is really great.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
We'll see you both in a week.
I know. That's so cool.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.